Hey, welcome. So Vince Bluto here, and I'm going to share a little bit about the relationship between trauma and our identity. And it's important to know fundamentally the identity that we hold for ourselves, or that which we think we truly are, determines every behavior, determines how we think, determines even a lot of how we feel, how we respond to life or react to life, and the behavior that flows from the thoughts and the emotions connected or associated with the identity that we hold ourselves to be, what we believe we actually are. And trauma, small or great, has an impact on how we identify ourselves or what we believe we are. And there's so much to say about our development as human beings, the development of our consciousness, how we perceive the world, how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive other people. And I'm not going to get into an exhaustive explanation about all of that here, but I'm going to speak a little bit about trauma and its relationship to identity, how it impacts our lives, our experiences, our interpretation of reality or that which is going on around us, and even that which is going on within us. And the purpose of this is to help to bring some clarity within you, to help free you, to help you realize what you actually are beyond the identity that you may have developed in relationship to your experience in the world, to the people around you, and in relationship to various traumatic experiences you may have had that then had you form some limited structure of a personality that may not be working for you, that may be causing problems in your relationships, that may be causing problems in your life, that may be causing problems at work, or maybe internally you're just unclear about what you want, what's important to you, or maybe you're just not feeling right. You feel a little bit off, you feel a little bit sad, maybe you feel anxious, maybe you feel depressed. Uh, who we think we are is not just a concept in the mind. And so we say who we think we are. It's who we are that we are. Who we are being that we are as a being is more of an accurate way to say it, because there's a whole conviction of our entire essence, not just our mentality, but our emotional conviction and our physiological conviction makes up our identity. And that identity can become very rigid, and for most of us it is, and can become very inflexible in how we relate to life. We determine certain things to be pro-survival, or things that are going to help us, like certain thoughts, emotions, and actions that will be beneficial and help us live longer, better, healthier lives, or protect us in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes that works, but in other situations it doesn't. And what can happen is we have a tendency, because of our identity, to apply certain qualities or characteristics of being to every scenario in life where it may not actually be appropriate. Now, example of this is I had to learn how to defend myself physically, to fight, because I was attacked many times over once I got into sixth grade. And I take full responsibility for even how that came into my world now, understanding what I was carrying into that, into school with me. And though things happened to me and left me a certain way, I was attracting certain things because I was in a really negative space internally. And life was showing me that by bringing bullies into my space. So I learned to have to fight. And what happened is I learned that fighting got me praise and attention from other kids at school, and popularity even. And so my brain started to associate this with, like, wow, fighting equals strength and superiority and power and attention and acceptance and belonging, which I didn't feel I had. I was in a new school, a public school that I'd never been to before. I had no friends. And so this association was made very quickly. So I began to identify as a fighter, as a tough guy. And there were other influences and role models in my life prior to this that would have me identify this way. But I learned that fighting was like a way to not only solve problems when people were threatening me, but it was a way to get attention, and it was a way to get popularity. And so I developed this line of thinking and behaving, and soon became and emoting the feelings that come with all of that. And it became an identity. And I got involved with gangs and ultimately crime and drug dealing and drug using. And, it became this whole world. And I was applying certain survival characteristics and wanting to deepen my application of that, to survive, and it just got me into a world of pain and a world of trouble. And underneath all of that, there were some deep traumas that were unhandled, unprocessed, and it caused me tremendous suffering. Now, that's an extreme example that maybe others watching this, like you watching this, might not be able to identify with yourself. Maybe you're not a fighter. But there are certain ways of being and acting that you develop as an identity that become fixed and rigid. You might react defensively all the time. Maybe your spouse, your partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, parents, maybe your defense to your parents whenever they ask you to do something is like, don't tell me what to do. I don't want to do anything you tell me what to do. That could become an identity. Like, it's like, that's who I am. That's how I deal with life. And it can be very fixed and rigid. And it provides no other possibility for connection, for understanding, for growth. And we can become very rigid about this and want to reinforce that over and over again because we really believe that's who I am, and it's who I must be in a situation. And again, sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's beneficial. Maybe sometimes our parents are over encroaching on our boundaries and pushing us around, and we're trying to find some level of autonomy because that's it's in our nature to be autonomous beings, not to be controlled and submissive, as a slave all the time. And so we're trying to set up some boundaries, and maybe the way we do that is we get defensive, we get reactive, we say no, and we get very forceful. And maybe there's a time when that has to show up, and the parents maybe realize, well, maybe I'm pushing a little too hard, and so those setting of those boundaries can be effective. But then we take that on as like, I always need to be that way, and so I always am reacting defensively or, and forcefully instead of listening, and maybe something's different. And we start to think that all situations are the same automatically. We just start to, if something sounds similar, the tone of voice of somebody speaking to me in an authoritative way, it might remind me of how my parents spoke, and so I react defensively to that automatically, unconsciously. And so this is how our identity can become very damaging to us, because it prevents us from knowing more of what's available inside a given moment. And it also can prevent us from acting appropriately, that which would produce the greatest possible result, not just for me or you or whoever's in the situation, but everybody else involved. And even in the long term of things, like extended impacts from our choices in the moment. And so a fixed identity can prevent us from evaluating things newly, and we become very fixed in our evaluation of things, and it prevents new possibilities, growth, and expansion. And this is how a lot of relationships fail and fall apart. This is how we trap ourselves. We get stuck into careers because we're so sure that I need to get good grades, I need to go to school, and pass all the tests and get good grades. I need to find a safe and comfortable job, and the next thing you know, that identity that I had growing up that got me into this particular job has left me very unhappy. And maybe that was formed out of a trauma. Maybe my parents were really insistent, and I wanted to do something creative like art or play piano or guitar or something. Or maybe I like sports, but maybe my parents were very forceful. Maybe they shamed me, and they, for wanting to do that, and they, wanted to force me to focus on my studies instead. And it can be traumatic. I was disappointed, I was hurt, and I never quite got that complete, was able to let that go. And maybe I complied in order to survive or to be accepted or to belong, or maybe I rebel, right? And I just completely, as soon as I'm 18, I'm out of the house, or maybe I leave even sooner than that, I run away. And, these traumatic moments can cause us to react in various ways that then become these fixed and rigid identities that we carry on forever and ever. I land in a job I don't like, or I'm rebelling against my parents, so I'm going to prove them wrong, and I'm doing these things that make me unhappy. Whatever it is, our identity can be terribly destructive. And even those identities that we operate in that have us successful, maybe we make a lot of money, don't necessarily mean that we're happy, or we know how to have a great relationship, or that we're a great parent, or that we're even a great friend. And we may not even know that. I mean, most of our social conditioning doesn't allow us to be deeply honest and real with each other. And so it's not like we're even willing to allow our identity to be challenged. A lot of the time, there are those of us in the self-development world that we're very interested in pursuing a new identity, because we've learned that our identity, that we've, developed it to a certain point in time, it wasn't working anymore. And so we started to get into self-development. We want to transform what our identity is. And so, just freestyling this video, so bear with me. I hope that what I'm sharing has some level of value for you. And if it does, please comment and let me know. And if it didn't in any way and you're still here, please let me know that too. Feedback is important. I'm ready to create, what's effective for you. But I'm trying to paint a picture here of identity and its relationship to trauma and how trauma can impact our identity. In my case, I give you an extreme example how, I developed this identity that a fighter is someone who's accepted and belongs and approved of and appreciated, and even maybe can get a little famous inside of the smaller circles that I belonged in. So that was one thing that happened to me. That's one way that I got and formed an identity. Now I've long given that up for the most part. I still feel like a tough guy. I still feel like, I've got that comfort, that confidence, but I don't feel like I have to prove anything to anybody by fighting or doing anything like that. I feel strong in myself, but there's no need to prove. And let me go a little bit further back and talk about this relationship between trauma and identity. In my example, so before I got into the 6th grade and I, was getting picked on, there were some things happening back at home that were going to be life-changing for me. And to this day, I've been still facing and feeling and dealing with so much of what happened and how it's impacted my life for up to 30 plus years later. I was about 10 years old, and my mother met a new guy living in the neighborhood who she started to take a liking to. And she had been divorced from my dad for a few years, like maybe 3 years or so now, and my real father. And she got close to this guy, and one day I came home and found her bloody and nose was broken, smashed completely flat. She was black-eyed and blood coming all out of her mouth and her nose, and she was laying by the door, and I'm like, what happened? And it turned out that this guy that she had been dating now for a little while had beaten her. And it was shocking to me, and I'd gotten to know this guy a little bit, and he was very intimidating, very kind of tough guy. At the time, he was about 30 years old or 29, and I was only 10, and kind of like the bar, bicycle, gang-looking type of guy, cowboy hat and boots kind of guy, and I was very intimidated, and but something in me felt like I needed to protect my mom, but something in me also felt like I couldn't. Like I was too small, too weak, too afraid, and I knew he was tough, and I just saw what he did to my mom, so it was like such a shock. Like, if he would do that to her, what would he do to me or to my sister? And so there was all these emotions and fears and different types of fear perspectives of what would happen to me and everybody else. And this whole moment was so life-changing for me and formative, because I determined I would never be strong enough in that moment to make a difference. I also determined that something was wrong with me, because I believed I should be able to help and protect my mom, and I couldn't protect her from what happened, and I didn't believe I could protect her from what might be coming. And I also felt like an obligation to do something about it, like I should go beat him up or something. And I also felt terrified to do this. So I felt deep, deep shame. I really judged myself. I was so against myself in that moment, and I can see all those emotions and thoughts looking back now, because I've done a lot of work within myself over the years, and it hurt me deeply in that moment. And I turned against myself in some crazy way, because I believed that I should be something more, and I was afraid that I wasn't. And this fear, I didn't want anyone to find out that I was afraid. I didn't want anyone to know that I felt so weak and that I felt so helpless, and that I couldn't do anything to protect my mom. Something about that, like I was terrified of people finding that out. And it's weird how my mind worked at that time, but that's what was going on. And I got some understanding about even how that mindset came to be, and I won't go into those details. But in that moment, I felt so ashamed of myself. Which, again, this is what was attracting the bullying in 6th grade when I went to school for the first time at this new school. And I know that because I felt so shamed in myself, and I felt so dark, and I was hiding so much within me, I was just a perfect magnet. And it hurt me to carry all of this inside of me, but I didn't know what to do. And that's when the bullying led to me starting to defend myself, and that started to get praise and attention. And then I was invited to join a gang, which made perfect sense. And to me, because I felt like I would belong more and I had tougher people surrounding me. And, I was only in seventh grade when all this happened, and sixth grade initially, and then seventh grade by the time I joined the gang. And, I'm like 12 years old, and I'm already, fighting 5 people to get into this gang. And, this became a world for me. And it culminated in 1999, where I nearly died from a drug overdose. That identity that I had formed up till 1999 got me almost completely into the grave. And I realized that while I was in the hospital after this overdose and on drugs and heavy, crazy crime and drug lifestyle. And I decided, like, I needed a change. I needed to turn myself around. I wasn't going to make it if I continued this way. So I recognized that the identity that I had formed and developed up till then was not working, and I needed to give it up. So I knew that much. And this is the power of a transformation of identity. I'm going to wrap up this video on this. I determined I could no longer be that person. And so I cut off my relationship with every single person that I was involved with, all my friends, all the people I partied with and used with and hung out with, and everything. I just gave up the whole business of drug dealing and everything. I was like, I'm going to start all over. I got a basic job doing construction. I mean, I tried even different things before that, but I got the one that stuck was doing some construction, and that was very therapeutic for me, honestly. And I started to just search for answers. I wanted to know, what happened, and how can I become something more, and what was the meaning to life, and what would happen, if I truly had died because I didn't see anything, experience anything, and I was afraid, like, wow, is that the end? There's like nothing else beyond death. And so I became very curious about all these things, and I began going to the library, searching for answers inside of books, which was just a logical thing for me. And I began to alter who I was completely, radically, just began to redefine myself. And as someone who was no longer going to be part of that old world, and I struggled deeply at that time in my life. I'm 22 years old, 21, 22, and I didn't know how to be anything. Like, I didn't want to be who I was. I was ashamed of all the thoughts that I had from the years prior of how I lived, and I could see all this stuff flowing through my mind. I wouldn't act on any of it. I didn't want to be this person. I didn't want to have these thoughts anymore. But I started practicing Zen Buddhist meditation, just sitting quietly with myself, and that gave me the ability to just be with what was going on. And just being with, which is part of the practice of the core encounter, is teaching people how to do that and giving them the space and the guidance and the practice of just being with whatever's there. And the core encounter is my flagship program that supports people in just totally radically transforming everything they are from the inside out, and really discovering who they are truly beyond the fragmented identities we develop. But I learned to be with what was there peacefully, and eventually it subsided and things began to open up. I started to get connected with nature. I started to experience joy and pleasure just in being with nature alone, and being with myself, and being with the world as it was. And a new identity was forming. I began to really devote myself to this consistent seeking of knowledge of the truth. And it all culminated one day in a very powerful revelation of light opening up inside of me falling to my knees, saying something that I never thought I would say, because I was never interested in this character. But I said the words Jesus Christ. And it was just a realization in that moment that there is a God, and there is a relationship to God that I and everyone in this universe has. And it was just plain as day. And it was always there. It was never not there. And I knew this. And I realized what I truly am in that moment. And this was over 20 years ago. And from then on, I made a commitment to helping other people discover this for themselves, getting connected to it. And of course, I pursued Christianity for many, many years, very devotedly and intently, because the first character that I experienced, but it wasn't like I saw a man. It was just this realization that Jesus Christ is this uniquely brilliant presence of God that I had not known. And, I was studying many other religious texts and everything, which were all valuable and still are valuable to this day. But I got very passionately interested in Christianity, which I wasn't at the time. And then I found out that Christianity has many different dimensions to it, and that not all of them were lining up with my direct experience. And so I just continued to follow what had been revealed in me, as me. And if the Bible opened itself up for me, and many other religious texts have to this day, which I continue to study and to read and reflect. And I love learning the languages that point to that which is indescribable, really, that which we really are within our the most essential nature. Apart from the personal identity that we all have, there's something much greater. But I won't go too much into all of that. I'm just going to say that no matter where you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what you've been through, no matter what's happened to you, you're not that. You're not. I'm not a drug dealer. I'm not a drug user. I'm not a criminal. I'm not an abused person. I'm not a trauma survivor. I'm not any of those things. Who and what I am, essentially, at my core, at the core of my being, is beyond description, really. Infinite and grand in nature. It's beyond all labels and beyond all form and beyond all of whatever perspectives we can have. And it may seem terrifying to enter this space of nothingness as an identity, but it could also be extremely liberating. And that doesn't mean you have to give up being a whatever you are in the world, a husband, a father, a boyfriend to someone, a girlfriend to someone, an artist, a musician, an engineer, a programmer. It doesn't matter. All of those things are functions of this expression of the being that you ultimately are. But you are not bound or limited by any of that. And it can be extremely freeing and liberating to discover this. And so I'm passionate about leading people to have this experience for themselves. I'm passionate about helping people to overcome the experiences of trauma in their lives and help them see that they are not that. They're not bound by that. And there are ways and there are methods and there are tools and there are practices. And most of all, there are presences of people like myself and my team who care enough about human being and understand the pains and the hurts that we all go through and how to be with that and show you how you can be with it as well. And that's one of the things that humanity is mostly struggling with today, is the ability to be with what's going on inside of themselves, especially that subconscious content. Learning how to be with that and to welcome and open up and invite all of that into awareness so that it can be seen for what it is, and the conscious and subconscious marriage can take place, so there's no longer a conflict between the two. The subconscious mind is no longer dictating how things go. It starts to dissolve its reactive force through the way we are supporting people through trauma integration, shadow integration, using tools and techniques like breathing and special breath practices that help to calm the nervous system and regulate the nervous system and teach people how to experience and create the experience more consistently of calm, centered awareness and pure being, moment by moment. And this is a lot of the work that we do. There's so much more involved, and there's a tremendous amount of science that is the foundation of what we do, but there's also a tremendous amount of spiritual insight and ancient spiritual wisdom that goes into what we do and how we serve others and how we all come into spirituality and scientific knowledge always work together harmoniously when you get to the core, in essence, the truth of both of those things. There is no discrepancy. I think true spirituality is extremely scientific. It can be understood. There are mysteries. There's always mysteries. But many of those mysteries are being understood now and can be applied for our benefit and the benefit of those we love. So thanks for taking the time to watch this video. This was a freestyle video on trauma and our relationship and the relationship to our identity. And I shared a little bit about my experience. If you like this video, please consider sharing it, as it may benefit somebody else. And please definitely comment and share whatever you might have heard for yourself. Maybe you relate to this in some way. I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to read about that, or maybe you have some questions. Feel free to comment those. All right, I'm Vince Bolito. I appreciate your time and attention today. Bless you in every way, and we'll talk soon.